Hey, everybody. Hey, Dave Poplar. How are you?
Hey Al, doing
Good to
great.
see you. Emily Harnett. Hi.
Hi, Al.
Great to see you. Molly O'Neill. Oh, it's always good to see you. And Kate Colby. Hi.
Hello.
So let's all unmute so that we can just talk about this poem by Ken Taylor. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this. Let's see. This is a book by Ken Taylor called Aramancy Garage. And I've been struck by this trope of Ken Taylor's, where he writes poems that are supposedly clouds in the shape of things. Here are some of the titles of the poems: Cloud in the Shape of Jazz Hands, Cloud in the Shape of Sun Ra, free jazz, Cloud in the Shape of Flossing, Cloud in the Shape of the Way the Mind in a Dream State Recombines, Cloud in the Shape of Spelling the Alphabet, Cloud in the Shape of a Cold Case, Cloud in the Shape of a Praise Poem, Cloud in the Shape of a Portrait of the Artist as a shadow of his former self. And then our poem, the poem we're going to talk about, Cloud in the Shape of Misunderstanding Haiku. So I want to start with the title. I just love this conceit of writing poems that are supposedly clouds that take a shape of something else. So my first question, Emily Harnett, is what do you make of this wonderful trope of writing poems that are clouds? And in particular, in this case, the poem is a cloud in the shape of not just haiku, but of misunderstanding haiku. Am I wrong that there's a kind of paradox in there that haiku could possibly be cloudy, shapeless, formless? That's so funny. It's so interesting a way to think about haiku. What do you think of that title?
When I think of haikus, I think of one of the most kind of rigidly structured, most sort of technically exact forms of poetry they are. And there's, a huge opposition there between the formal constraint of haiku and the sort of formlessness of clouds. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Kate, what do you think more on this? Like, you're a poet. If you were tasking yourself to write poems that are cloudy, formless, shapeless, moving, amorphous, I guess would be the word, how could it possibly put a poet in mind of haiku? What is the tension there, and what's the possibility? It seems like there's a great opportunity.
Well, haiku typically addresses nature, but in exacting full stop images, like Emily was saying. And so the clouds are paradoxical, not paradoxical, but a difficult subject for haiku because they're shifting vaporous things and momentary. So the haiku has this sort of is self-contained, but the cloud is always shifting and moving and modulating.
Yeah. So Molly and Dave, I think the stanzas are haiku-like. Each stanza has 3 lines. They're not really haiku, they're more syllables than haiku, but insofar as they are haiku-like, could you pick one and extract it? Each of you, Dave and Molly, pick one and extract it and treat it like a haiku? Does it ever, do any of the individual pieces behave like a haiku? Do they create a specific enough image, or do they all resist? Each part resists like a cloud. What do you think, Molly? Can you pick one that might be good to talk about?
Well, right away, the first one seems pretty literal how it opens. This swoops like a hurried neck tattoo.
So that would be like a cloud.
Yeah, so that draws me into an image of, maybe a sloppy neck tattoo. I don't know why I picked this one. But then
a neck tattoo that's not been applied very well, a hurried one.
Right, exactly. But then it sort of veers. We have a space and then it goes somewhere else with returning to the pump handle, passing off sunk costs. So there is that place where it shifts and it becomes something different.
Yeah. So it's visual, specifically visual, but as you move along, you realize that like a cloud, it's just going to change its visuality and its metaphor. I already like it. I mean, I already like this. Dave, I guess we're going to emerge, the five of us, to seeing this poem as something of either a critique of imagistic writing, or at least a kind of post-imagistic writing. But before we do that, Dave, pick another one and take us through it.
It's interesting because I find that these have this form element that echoes haiku, but individually they seem different enough from haiku. They're not just images. To me, haiku seems to represent this idea where the author is sort of subsumed into the background. And here it seems like the author, the commentary is still in driving each stanza here. It's interesting because for me, haiku is almost like a communitarian approach where the author would be identified as just being first and foremost part of the collective, whereas like, imagistic stuff is almost libertarian, where the author wants to be front and center to specifically have the freedom. And these stanzas seem imagistic in that sense where they're using this form, but the author is still making a commentary. It's not like a haiku sitting back having an objective observation of this epiphatic moment in time of nature.
Wow. So your political metaphors, political ideological metaphors.
Apologize for that.
No, please don't apologize. I mean, I think you're saying something about what Ken Taylor is trying to achieve with his trope of poems as clouds. How would you translate that into politics? I mean, I didn't know we were going to go this direction, but I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Is he casting doubt upon that libertarian strain in imagism?
It's funny.
As jazz would.
I have I have two thoughts about the use of clouds and then the political metaphor. Like to me, the imagistic process, the fact that there's a manifesto for imagism, I think is kind of funny. And I don't mean to make it less serious than it is, but it reminds me of the Monty Python movie Life of Brian, the scene where Brian is telling the crowd, you must think for yourselves. You're all individuals. Yes, we are all individuals. And to me, like that's the Imagist manifesto saying, you must be free. Everybody, you must be free. Follow this path to be free. And it seems like it can be seen as contrived in that way. So
its tone, maybe. Oh, you're taking us somewhere. The tone of this poem, which I find to be fun sometimes, even a little goofy, or free. Sorry to use that word. Free in the sense of what Molly pointed out in that first stanza. Like just shifting from the outrageously fabulous analogy of a cloud like a hurried necktie to moving to the pump handle, passing off sunk costs. That's really a kind of magnificent, show-offy, Yeah. It's got that tone. All right, so now what we're going to do is lightning round for all five of us. Lightning round. We're going to go around a couple times. The poem, you're nervous about this question. You have no idea what I'm doing. The poem often makes metapoetic references to the whole problem of imagism, of writing a haiku. So what I'd like to do is for the five of us to collect some of these. And I'll start, but then we'll go around the horn. We'll go to Molly, then Emily, then Kate, then Dave. Okay, I'll start. The fourth stanza refers to syllabic misconstrue. So that seems to be a reference to the whole problem of the haiku. And I'm just going to leave it at that. So there, you read that and you think, okay, a cloud is like a syllabic misconstrue, but that is, of course, the problem of the haiku, cloud or no. Okay. Molly, you got one, a metapoetic reference to imagism or haikus or?
Yeah, in the next stanza, by not catching the gist of Imagist.
That's nice, because Imagist has gist in it. Do you want to tease that out a little bit? He's being funny. I mean, if you're writing a poem that's a cloud in the shape of haiku, you're not catching the gist of Imagist.
Right.
Did I do that for you? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you did. Well, it's hard to tell whether it's like a little self-deprecating or if it's ironic and directed at other Imagist poets or other people who were, using that form.
Yeah. And the next line, in capital waves of pumice. I have no idea what's going on there, but I do see a cloud. I do see a cloud in the capital wave of pumice, and maybe he succeeded. Okay, Emily, metapoetic signpost.
I'm looking at tell the truth, but first. And the metapoetic gesture there is to, invoke Emily Dickinson, the sort of godmother of, radical poetry.
And of precision too, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, tell the truth, but tell it slant. We know that. And this poem feels like it's all about telling it slant and even slanting away from, that quotation of the Dickinson poem.
Yeah. Cloud, the poem as a cloud is all about slant. Tell the truth, but first a little shishi. I don't know why, but I think of shishi as, I don't know, the opposite of telling the truth and also of cloudiness. Okay, cool. Kate, is there another reference to imagism or haiku in here?
Sure. On the second page, he kind of does this skipping over or with sort of whimsical nouns and verbs. The terpsichorean economies, caning, canary, torts, green peaches, and polka dots folded in a chifforobe of uncertain origins beyond practice. Seems like kind of a jab at the idea of an essence that can be exacted in a haiku or an imagistic poem.
So far, it seems like he is, I don't know if mock is the right word, but he's really having a go, trying to use a certain impressionism to make us think differently about precision. Dave, your turn. Metapoetic moment.
As Eros arises, arose.
Absolutely.
I love that. It's, feeling gives rise to cliche.
Yeah. And of course, Rose conjures the whole supposed revolution of Williams and HD and Stein in that moment. Do you want to try to close read or paraphrase as Eros arises, arose?
More than that, more than just
more than what you just did.
True feeling. Well, it's true feeling giving rise to another reference to mimesis, to the artistic representation, an attempt at artistically representing this Eros, and it becomes a rose, and then that can become cliche, that can lose its meaning when you try to represent it, merely represent it.
Yeah. And that whole stanza is just gorgeous. It's smart and satirical, but also gorgeous. As if a palimpsest, which you could take what the juxtapositional images such as Ezra Pound in the Station of the Metro poem. That's all about that kind of juxtapositional setting. As if a palimpsest adding sacrifice to what? To one breath recitation. Certainly haiku is aiming at the one breath recitation. Okay, who wants to go for another round? Oh, I'll do another round. Okay. There's so many. Opaque poetry is mostly frowned upon. That's kind of an obvious one, right? The Imagist Manifesto had no room for anything opaque. And of course, modern poetry has responded since then, and all the decades since then, doing something different. Opacity is a crucial thing. Okay, Kate, another one. Do you have another one?
Piecework, sweat of mercy, ever situated in quiddity. he's sort of suggesting that the work of poetry is piecework, in spite of its claims to, you know, getting access to something essential or fixed.
That's really great. Can you spell out for people who might be watching this video and they're not seeing the kind of dark connotations of piecework in terms of economics or capitalism? I mean, piecework is the word is thought, the word could conjure up modernist fragmentation, but it has a stronger connotation than fragmentation, piecework. Like you're doing a piece of the work and you have no idea what unalienated relationships with the rest of the work would be like. Did I just answer the question I asked you? Sorry.
Well, it has a suggestion of, you know, a sweatshop or assembly line, even women's work, piecing fabric for clothing or quilting.
Right.
Certainly kind of a base, low-paid labor. And
in a way, I mean, the Imagist movement, such as it was, which went on long past anybody's interest in it, the annual Imagist anthologies went all the way through the end of the 20s, I think actually into the 30s, and it became a kind of assembly line of modern poems. You know, and the critique of it, it's a little late. He's writing this book. This is a 2020 book. It's a little late to be criticizing Imagism for its fallacies, except, I don't know. I think Imagism still, I think that idea of precision still dominates. Okay, who wants to do another meta-poetic? They're all over the place. Who's next? Molly, are you next?
Yeah, I really like adjective plus noun of noun. It's like super formulaic, like mathematical structure.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, Emily, your turn.
Give me a second.
You run out? Okay.
Maybe.
Wow.
Oh, no,
Emily,
I've got it. I'm back.
Got it. Okay.
Expecting order from unschooled fish. To me, that feels like a little bit of an accusation or a send up of the reader who expects order from poetry where there cannot be order.
Yeah. It's also a brilliant impressionistic analogy or visualization of a cloud, unschooled fish, because we think of fish moving in schools. So if you're looking at clouds, Emily, do you ever do cloud appreciation? You don't, do you? You don't have time.
You're right. I wish, Al, more time.
You got to go out to that campus of the school you're teaching on, lie down on the grass and look at the clouds. I do a lot of that in the summertime. Unschooled fish, it's exactly what's going on up there. You know, at first it looks like a school of fish, and then you realize, oh, no, they are not in formation. Dave, you got one?
I love the line, as Western faux pas, casting in Eastern deeps and not fishing further out.
Yeah, I really like that. In fact, can I piggyback on that and do one for myself? I think there's something going on there with the Orientalism of haiku and of Imagism. Its borrowings from Japan, Korea, and China, particularly from Japan, and particularly Pound, who, by the way, didn't talk about misunderstanding haiku. He didn't know any Japanese. Syllabic misconstrue, strummed. This is almost the violating act of the poet. Plucked. So you have this flow of life that's being captured by this guy who's looking at a face in the crowd in the metro in Paris, and he just nails it, right? Nails it. There's something violent and almost abusive of that. Strummed, plucked, cut, as an askance grab. I think what Pound is doing is an askance grab. As Western faux pas, misunderstanding haiku, casting in Eastern deeps. Casting as in fishing. So Pound is fishing in the deep water of deep philosophical traditions of the East, and he just sort of grabs something as a Western faux pas. I think you can really read a semi-subliminal or fairly explicit critique there. And I don't think that's overreading. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go around once, and I would invite you either to say a final word or two about this poem, or maybe we'll do both. I'd like to talk more about the title, shape, and particularly Misunderstanding Haiku. I mean, Kate, we'll start with you. I mean, I was taught that haiku are it's the one thing that you both think you can understand, it's so precise, and also realize in the koan sense that you'll never understand. And I wonder what you think Ken Taylor's doing with this project of a poetry that is always a cloud in the shape of clouds are shapeless, in the shape of something else, to create an analogy. What are your thoughts about this whole project, or about Misunderstanding Haiku? Or maybe you can just punt and say one more thing about the poem that interests you.
Well, what I noticed about the title is the word misunderstanding, and how it refused to resolve into either an adjective or a verb for me, so that the speaker is misunderstanding haiku, and haiku itself doesn't understand. So, and he sort of toggles back and forth between those possibilities through the poem, I think. Like, do I have it wrong, or does haiku have it wrong? Or do those who exalt haiku have it wrong?
That's really so smart, because basically you've taught me that word misunderstanding implicates the speaker poet. It's in the shape of my misunderstanding of what the problem I have with haiku. I've made a poem that's like a cloud, that's like the way I misunderstand haiku. It's kind of mea culpa that winds up being really generative.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that. Okay, who wants to go next? Molly, what are final thought or something about Misunderstanding Haiku?
Yeah, coming back to this fishing in Eastern waters, I love on the last page this attempting moshi moshi but saying topsy turvy, and that.
Can you explain that?
Well, I had to Google moshi moshi because I don't speak Japanese, but from what I could gather, it's a way of saying hello on the telephone in particular, and it basically translates to I say. So you're getting the attention of somebody, you're about to express yourself in some way. But then when, Pound or whoever we're talking about here tries to kind of appropriate that, it comes out topsy-turvy. And this reminded me of The Encounter, right? That Japanese paper napkin, like that just brought that right up.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. It's also, he's very clever, Ken Taylor. It's a very funny line. Yeah. Okay, Emily Harnett, final thought or anything about Misunderstanding Haiku? You've never misunderstood a haiku in your life.
That's flattering, and sorry for the sound of drilling in the apartment over, if you can hear that.
It's okay.
Yeah, I like this poem because I think it has a sort of like sweet hippie theory of the self, right? Where I love how these begin with sort of straightforward visual descriptions, which then sort of dissolve into a thought or some type of interior impression, right? A cloud is an image, and misunderstanding haiku is a sort of state of mind or something abstract and immaterial. And you think about an image, we have a sense of an image as something, a perception of a kind of external object, something which exists outside of yourself.
Yeah.
And for me, this poem seems to say, like, what is the difference between an image and a thought, right? They are all part of our internal landscape. So why not move from a cloud to a haiku, or a neck tattoo to some sort of metapoetic statement? They're all part of the same, inner universe.
Oh, I really like that. Thank you. Dave Poplar.
I have sort of a hopeful interpretation of the poem, which jumps off the second to the last stanza. Tell the truth, but first a little shishi is bloodletting in nonchalance. And to me, that conjures up the whole concept of the fact that when people start off creative writing, they often try way too hard, and they take themselves way too seriously, and they just make things that are like overly pretentious in out of their misunderstanding, out of their lack of experience. So this whole process of misunderstanding is really the way to gain understanding. So maybe it's not just making fun of the people who misunderstand haiku or try too hard, but maybe it's recognizing that, you know, that's the process. And in a sense, that clouds they're all about process. Cloud is always becoming something else. So maybe it's sort of a recognition of the importance of the process towards understanding.
Well said. Okay, I'm going to say one more thing, and then it's going to turn into an invitation for each of you to just very briefly to say, in effect, why you care about poems or poets who do this kind of thing, why this is a good thing, why poetry is cool, I guess, in the end. It comes from that unschooled fish stanza. Because after the unschooled fish, we get a long break, and then we get a question that has no question mark, but I'm going to read it as if it's a question. And it's very programmatic statement, very ideological, very anti-imagist, very anti-precision. And it makes a case for poetry. I think it's an Ars Poetica. It says, can we not aim to be exact and make boo-boo part of the refrain? And I think what I love boo-boo there. I think what he's saying is, if you're not making a mistake, you're making a mistake. Or why aim to be exact? That's not life. It's not even nature, given the cloud. Why can't language do the hard thing? Why shouldn't we not aim to be exact and allow error, mistaken, misunderstanding, boo-boos be the refrain? These are refrains. So I invite you to go large on this last comment. If you share my enthusiasm for this poetic idea, this anti-imagist idea, can we not pin things down? Because that's not really what poetry does at its best. It, at its best, is generative, unformed, doesn't know where it's going, embraces shapelessness. So who wants to, Emily, why do you grok this? Why is this good? Why does this get you up in the morning and teach poetry to young people?
Sure. I love this line. And I think because, you know, what you're saying here about precision, I think this poet and, you know, the poets we're talking about, they do believe in precision, but not exactly exactness. Or I guess what I'm trying to say is that there is in a culture and sort of conventional literary thinking, an idea that what counts as precision is really a type of sort of fossilized idea of order or exactitude, which really has nothing to do with describing the world accurately. You know, the world is anarchic, so, you know, the tools we use to describe it should also be anarchic. And if you think of a term like boo-boo, there's a sense that it is not precise. People would say it's not precise, but it's actually perfectly precise. It's like that's what it feels like to get hurt. It feels like kids are being completely precise when they say that, even if it is chaotic, even if it doesn't conform to our sense of what type of language is acceptable. So to me, this poetry seems to be saying that to be truly precise in your account of the world, you would have to let disorder in, and he does that.
Nice. All right, Molly, I know you feel this way, but I'm curious to know what you want to say in response to this idea of poetry of art or of art.
I'm thinking about Ron Silliman and the democracy of kind of showing the work, and that including boo-boo as part of the refrain, and inviting and welcoming mistakes as part of the process. Just makes it feel so much more democratic, where, you know, if the form is perfect, if the haiku is perfect, then there's a hierarchy between the poet and the reader, and like, who wants that?
Yeah, I think you're thinking of his experiment on Labor Day, trying to get it all in and living with the things he doesn't understand or doesn't perceive well. Yeah, that's very nice. Dave Poplar, general statement about poetry that you can get from this. I mean, you're a philosopher, so the question is, can we not aim to be exact?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess
There are no logical positivists at your graduate school, I imagine,
um,
nor empiricists.
just going off a little bit what Emily and Molly said, it all of this, all of art is artificial. At least it's an artifact in some way. And the cool thing about poetry and poetry that plays with form is it tries as best we possibly can to strip away that artifice. And in that sense, it might be more of a direct channel to the feeling that drives it. Maybe the feeling that it's trying to capture, but the feeling that drives it. So this poem seems to really like show the work, and to try to get at that ability to strip away what we're talking about, to focus on the artifice and strip it away and say, hey, there's something at the core of this. No other art form seems to really be able to do that as well, because it's contained in something. So that's what I got.
I like it. Kate Colby, I admire your own poetry a lot, and I see you as someone, sorry for this setup. I see you as someone who tries to get it right, what you see, but always backs off of it in a very productive way. That aim. Is that tension captured at all in what this poet is trying to do here? Or how do you respond to it?
Well, I think a lot of poetry purports to, as Dave said, strip away extraneous stuff and get at something real or true or actual. And what I admire about this poem is how it's an argument for its own aleatory methods. And it speaks of its own, quote, heroic lack of agency throughout, and it lets a lot of noise in that one wants to strip away when one is trying to be a very precise kind of poet, like the as seen on TV, these sorts of interrupting thoughts and phrases that he allows in. And in the end, I think it's an argument for like a messy representation of a messy world.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I wouldn't compare it to what I do, but as a, as an attempt to sort of not send up, but like point at the faulty impetus, or not impetus, the faulty attempt to get at something real and true and fixed.
Right.
There is something similar in there.
And there's something about the aggressiveness of that gesture, the aggressiveness of I got to get this right. Not to mention the overconfidence involved, but the aggressiveness, that's really the one way you're not going to understand what clouds look like. The more aggressive you are in trying to capture the cloud, the less likely you are to understand what clouds are all about. Which leads me to my final point, which is a recommendation of a poem by Wallace Stevens called The Auroras of Autumn. It's a not much read poem of, I believe, 1948. And in that poem, he's up in Connecticut and he sees the aurora borealis. Do you see an aurora, Kate, once in a while in your neck of the woods? Not so much. You got to go north for it once in a while. And Stevens thought he would write a poem which took the form of the aurora. The aurora is the shimmering lights. It's cloud-like, right? And it just has it actually isn't a thing. It's charged particles and so forth. But it shimmers and it moves and it has a shapelessness. But it is a thing. It is actually a thing. And he writes this long poem in many sections in which he tries to convey in a poem the shape of the aurora borealis. And if somebody had written a poem which believed in the denotative capacity of poetry to capture the aurora, it would make just as little sense in words. And some wise critic once read the aurora borealis as expressing the anxiety, the fear of nuclear annihilation. 1948, the US has the bomb, the Soviets are about to get the bomb, and the aurora borealis is a kind of mushroom cloud in a way, that kind of shapelessness. So there is a politics, which is where Dave started, there is a politics of the poetry that tries to capture something that can't be captured, that's much too big for words. Anyway, thank you, Dave Poplar, Emily Harnett, Molly O'Neill, Kate Colby. Thank you all. It's been so much fun talking about this poem with you.